This recording will cover Chapter 10 from your textbook, Assessing and Teaching Content Area Learning and Vocabulary. And I did add a bunch of new slides that are not in your textbook. So if you don't watch any of the other recordings, at least watch this one because there is some new information that I really want to share with you all about content area learning and vocabulary. Okay, so here are our outcomes. Of course, there are plenty of them as always. So thinking about teaching content area information and vocabulary, thinking about science, social studies, math even, right? There's a lot of vocabulary in math, which we will cover in chapter 11. But vocabulary, if you think about it, it's really the key to reading comprehension. So students who come to you with poor vocabularies, they might struggle more with comprehension at the beginning until you can explicitly teach them some vocabulary and some content area vocabulary. So there's oral vocabulary, reading vocabulary, and academic vocabulary. Oral reading or oral vocabulary, words the reader recognizes in listening and speaking. Reading vocabulary, words reader recognizes or uses in print. And academic vocabulary, technical terms or concepts, specific to a content area like science or social studies. You might have someone who has a really strong oral vocabulary where they can recognize words in when they're speaking, or they have a really good speaking vocabulary, but then when they're reading, they might struggle to recognize some of those words. So two main approaches to teach vocabulary, we have indirect and direct. So direct is really that, explicit instruction of individual words, word learning strategies, stuff like that. Indirect is where, you're hearing and seeing words in conversation, reading, listening, using word detective skills, stuff like that, which of course, as I'm sure you're already guessing, pretty difficult for some of our students with learning problems and or behavior problems. So some specific word instruction strategies, I guess, that you could use. Use a lot of oral language. Make sure that your vocabulary is rich and that you're using words and even unfamiliar words with your students. So you can identify 3 high utility words, or you could have them in reading passages. The students could repeat the word, teach simple definition and examples, and the students could provide more examples to promote active involvement. Some of the new slides that I added to this chapter will show you some of these strategies. So you can also think about using pre-teaching, especially for the content area, right? Science, social studies, math. Use those words and identify those important words from, the chapter or the content or the passage that you'll cover in science that day, and teach them first. Interact with students, help them find synonyms for each word, provide examples, student-friendly definitions, stuff like that, and opportunities to practice those new words before that you even get to the reading of that content, okay? So you also want to think about word learning strategies. So contextual analysis. So, using those context clues to find what a word might mean. You could look for a definition, synonym, description, contrast, comparison, stuff like that. And you want to make sure you're modeling this process and being explicit. Your students with learning problems, they're not going to just get this naturally. You're going to need to model this for them and show them, let me look at the picture in this science book. Let me see if I can determine what this word might mean. Let me read before and after this word that I don't know and see if I can use the context to figure out what it might mean. There's also this analysis where you can break words into morphemes, use their meanings to find the whole word meaning. So remember, you want to think about prefixes, suffixes, root words, stuff like that, and teaching your students, okay, well, this is what this prefix means. If it's combined with this root word, here's what the word means. So really thinking about morphemic analysis. Dictionaries written at appropriate reading levels. I think we've talked about that. For your younger students, get some more age appropriate dictionaries as opposed to the Webster's or whatever it is now, Oxford Dictionary, that's 5,000 pages, which isn't really, but, find some more appropriate dictionaries for your younger students. And of course, thinking about how you're going to assess vocabulary knowledge, and my favorite, monitoring their progress, right? And it's a little challenging to monitor progress in vocabulary because there's so many different levels as to what, knowing what a word means. Can they recognize it? Can they define it? Can they use it in a sentence? Or, correctly. So there's a lot of different levels of vocabulary knowledge. So you want to think about the Common Core State Standards. Yeah, I know. For content area reading, for science and technical text, for example, figures, 10.4, so I thought this one was really interesting. Key ideas and details, craft and structure, integration of knowledge and ideas, range of reading and level of text complexity. And then 10-3, I think I just said point 0.4, but you know what I mean. Here are some other ones for reading in the content area, just some ideas for you. And then I also wanted to show you while I'm here, figure Oh, I was right. 10.4 and then 10.5, this comprehension canopy routine. So this is from 8th grade social studies, and you could think about pose a question to activate that prior knowledge. We've talked about that. Introduce the unit and pose critical questions for the unit, as you're introducing it, kind of before you get there, right? In this unit, we will ask these questions. And then you could introduce a video, you could provide a purpose for viewing the video, show the video, provide a turn and talk prompt so they could turn to their shoulder partner or their seat partner. And then you could present a comprehension focus question. We will think about this key question as we study this unit. How did the colonial regions develop differently? And you could adapt that, of course, to whatever content area you are talking about. There's also this essential words routine. So you could introduce the word, discuss the word, provide a turn and talk prompt, and follow up, revisit the word understanding and use in warm up activities on subsequent days. There's also a website, it's called explicitinstruction.org. So explicit instruction, all one word.org. And there are some video clips on there of a former professor, she's a special ed professor, using some of these strategies to teach her students, teach students where she's kind of going in to be a guest, in their classroom. But she uses some of these strategies. And so they're really interesting to see kind of in the real world. So you might just want to keep that in mind. Okay, so talked about that, promoting reading comprehension. So that canopy activity that we just talked about, essential word and critical reading, introduces the text with a purpose for reading and guiding the students with questions during the reading and a final question, after they're done. So not just, okay, we're going to read today, but here's why we're reading. Here's our purpose, and here's some guiding questions you can think about. There's also some content enhancement practices. It is a 6-step teaching routine for teaching concepts, and that is in Apply 10-2. So step 1, you want to think about what big ideas the students must learn, that critical information. Step 2, determine major concepts and related vocabulary. So that would be from your textbooks, trade books, curriculum guides, what the district says you have to teach, anything like that. And then you could create some semantic or content maps with some related vocabulary words, as in figure. Let's see if I can actually find it. I probably won't be able to. Figure 10-7. It's coming. So there you go. So there's a pretty detailed concept map, and I'm going to show you another example in just a second. So stick with me. All right. Steps 3 and steps 4. Evaluate text and instructional materials, thinking about the readability, the metrics for calculating coherence of text and user-friendly feature, audience appropriateness, stuff like that. Explicitness of the main ideas. Are the main ideas spelled out in that particular passage or text, or do the students really need to search for those main ideas? Initially, of course, we want the main ideas to be really explicit and really spelled out for them so they don't have to search to try to find the main ideas. As they get more proficient, yes, then they can have to search a little more. But, at the beginning, we want to be very explicit. And then step 4, assess students' background knowledge, going back to that background knowledge, prior knowledge, all of these things. You can use semantic maps again, brainstorming prior to each assigned reading, pre-teaching, stuff like that. And then step 5, prepare students using pre-learning activities, kind of what I was just talking about. So advanced organizers, concept diagrams, comparison tables, relationship charts, and curriculum maps and visual displays. So take a few minutes and look through all of these figures and apply 10-3 in the textbook, because there are some really great ideas, and I will show you a few of these as well as we go forward with this chapter. And then step 6, reinforce concept learning during and after lesson. So you want to think about revisiting advanced organizers, when you're done during the lesson and after the lesson. Go back and look at what you did, a week before or whenever you started, when you were getting ready to start that chapter. All right. So then a couple ways to make adaptations. Oh, I'm already there. I kept trying to move ahead. So you could think about substituting another textbook if you needed to, providing audio or videos, abridged versions, highlighting key concepts, stuff like that. And you can, you might have to teach students at the beginning how to highlight key points because otherwise, guess what? If you give them a highlighter and you say, okay, go ahead and highlight, what do you think they're going to do? They're going to highlight the entire thing, right? And not everything is important. So you want to teach them, hey, here's what you might want to highlight. Here's what you can not highlight. And then you could also provide alternative reading material if needed with similar content, kind of making that accommodation for your students. So study guides, you can create custom guides for them, provide structure that will help students with learning problems, maybe give them some guided notes, stuff like that, so they can follow along with you in an organized fashion, and then they just fill in those guiding notes as you're going along. That might be really helpful for them. Reading assignments, learning objectives. I'm not going to come up with a name, I know it, but there's something out there now, and you can, you show them a PowerPoint and you can stop throughout the PowerPoint and ask them questions, and they can answer it on response cards or on, clickers or on their phones or on their tablets or something like that. And of course, the name of the program of the thing is escaping me, but I'm sure you all know what I'm talking about. And then also you want to give some cues to help students listen to lectures. And I do have a slide about this. I put it at the end though, so just when we see that slide, just remember it's some cues to help them listen to lectures. Actually, let me see if I can find it really quickly. And then I think I'll save part 2 for all the slides that I added. Oh, here it is. And so this is slide 30, so it will come up. But just some, you could say things like, today we will be discussing, there are blank points I want you to be sure to learn or to listen for or to pay attention for. The main point of this discussion, to review, summarize, recap, say not all these things, obviously, all at once, but be explicit with them. Give them these cue cards. Let me repeat this. This is important. Write this down, stuff like that. Let me say this term. I'm going to tell you the definition. I'm going to say it again. I'm going to tell you the definition, right? So all of these things that you can do, you could write stuff out on the overhead, the board, whatever you had, information in a study guide or guided notes like we just talked about. And you can also emphasize some points using gestures, of course. Okay, so just keep that in mind that is there. I don't want to stop yet because I have a few more minutes. All right, so that's some ways to make adaptations. All right, so I'm going to talk to the next bit of slides. I think there's about 10 or 12 of them are not from the textbook directly, so they're from another presentation I did, which is why they look different, but I wanted to include them because I think there's some important information in here. So some general guidelines for vocabulary instruction, thinking about, in the content areas. Establish a list of vocabulary for each, chapter, subject, unit, however you want to divide it up. Evaluate comprehension, probe students' previous knowledge. We've talked about that, right? And frame the context for new content area vocabulary. We've talked about that a little bit as well. You want to also develop an environment where content area vocabulary is a normal part of instruction, curriculum, and assessment. And I know that sounds weird because, we're not, if we're talking about math and geometry, we're not running around on the playground after everybody saying, ooh, I'm a triangle, I'm going to come get you, right? But try to think of ways that you can incorporate more content area vocabulary into kind of everyday conversation. Encourage students to ask about terms they don't know. Say, hey, I'm not sure what this means. Can you tell me some more meanings? And then teach students how to find meanings of words, dictionary, the internet, notes, whatever might work for your students. All right, so some instructional strategies to teach content area vocabulary. Explicitly teach, as we've talked about. And again, visit that explicitinstruction.org if you have time, because she does a really nice job of explicitly teaching new vocabulary. So then there's some things called Frayer models, which you may have seen before. You just might not know the name. That's what a lot of people always say. Oh, I know what that is. I just didn't know what it was called. Graphic organizers, concept and semantic maps. We talked about that a second ago. Mnemonic strategies, and then things like word sorts. So I'm going to stop right here, and then I'll come back and talk about the Frayer model and some of these other graphic organizers, just because I'm about to run out of time. So that's the end of part 1. Come on back for part 2.